Hello and welcome back to What Helen Reads, and today I have my January wrap up for you. Okay, so in January I ended up reading 19 books and I was pretty pleased with that. My reading goal for 2023 is 180 books, so I've got a goal to read about 15 each month. So I'm just going to go through and tell you what I've been reading in the month of January and just give you a very brief review of each book. So the first book that I read was The Alpha's Seduction, and this is by Marlowe. And this is book 2 in the After End series. So after the end of the world, very similar to other Omegaverse books that are post-apocalyptic like this, we have the rise of Omegas and Alphas, and also the Betas who kind of untransitioned humans. And we also, in this universe, we kind of have the elders or the old ones, and these are people who kind of remained human. They didn't appear to become alphas or omegas, and then definitely not betas either, but they seem to be very long-lived. So in this particular story, our heroine is from the world before. She's lived for very many decades, but she still looks like she's in her 40s. And in the world before it kind of ended, she was a very important and powerful woman. She was the daughter of a senator in California, and when her father retired from his post, she was the next in line to become the senator. She was also married to a billionaire tech person, and when the end of the world came, her and her husband tried to do what they could to rescue as many people as possible, and unfortunately her husband died in a fire. She managed to escape, and she ended up many decades later in this kind of like beta camp that is run by this alpha, and the alpha is also very similar to her. He's one of the old ones. Now in the first book he gets, so the alpha that's in charge of the camp and is the alpha of alphas, if you like, he got his story in book 1. And in book 1, that's when we're introduced to the hero in this story. He is new to the camp, but he is an alpha, and he kind of comes to camp. Now, as soon as he sees our heroine, he knows that she's the one for him, but she doesn't understand how this is possible because she's not an Omega. Now, things go down in the camp. Something happens where he needs to capture her and take her away. So basically it becomes a bit of a captive situation, and also close proximity. Book is packed filled with plot and story and world building, and I would if you do enjoy Omegaverse, I would highly recommend this one, and I think Marlowe as an author is definitely one to watch. Okay, so the second book I read in January, we continued with the Omegaverse theme, and I read Possession by Liliana Carlisle, and this was actually book 1 in her Forbidden Alphas series. I really like Liliana Carlisle's kind of world building as well. She has also a really great take on the Omegaverse genre, and in many of her books the American government are mistreating the alphas, and other countries treat them differently. But in this particular sort of colony / state in America, all the alphas are kind of rounded up, and when they present, when they're 18, they get taken to an island, and they get trained for the military, and they're kind of kept in line by having Omega clothing given to them, so they've got the scent of the Omegas, and they're kind of kept in line by saying, if you're bad, then we won't send you these scents. But the alphas go mad without the scent of an Omega, and they're trapped on this island, and they're being kind of like, trained to be super soldiers. Meanwhile, the Omegas are told that the alphas are really, really bad, they need to stay away from them, and they are kept in these Omega communities. They get everything taken care of, they get a flat, they get food, they get money, they get shelter, all of that. But again, they're kind of captives themselves. They're not really allowed to leave where they are. They're not allowed to leave the city, and they've definitely got to stay away from the alphas. So in this one, our heroine, she feels a pull towards this island, and she goes and she sneaks out sometimes. She goes for long drives, and she sits on the cliff looking out at the island where the alphas are. At the start of this book, she meets the hero because he eventually, they trying to escape. The Alphas are trying to escape from the island, and they also trying to expose what the government are doing to them, and trying to overturn the thinking that Alphas are really bad and horrible and you should be scared of them. So there's a group of Alphas on the island that help one of them, the main character in this one, escape. And when he escapes, it happens to be on a night where she's kind of like sitting in her car on the cliff edge, and that's perfect timing for him because he basically has a getaway car, and he kind of takes this Omega almost, he sort of like almost like forces her. He takes her car and he takes her along with him, and at first he's going to use her as a bit of a hostage, but obviously he realises that she's his mate, they want to be together, and again, you know, the plot unravels really from there. But it really sets up the whole series in terms of what's going to happen next, and clearly other inmates from this kind of like prison slash army island are going to get their own books in the future. But I rated this one 4 stars, would again highly recommend it if you like Omegaverse, and Liliana Carlisle is definitely an author I recommend. I love all of her books I've read so far. So the next book that I read was Rise by Claire Kent, and this is book 4 in the Horde series. So Claire Kent is again an author I discovered last year, and I really like her, the different books and worlds that she creates. So, kind of like government or structure, like a criminal structure, where if you break the law, you either get abandoned on planets or you're put into like a prison planet. So it's a bit like you know, like Pitch Black, like the Chronicles of Riddick and stuff, where they kind of have these prisons, and once you go in there, like you're never coming out, basically. So Rise is the 4th book in this particular series, and in this one, it's basically based around this like sort of pleasure planet or station, and the main character Talia, she is a kind of like a pleasure worker, if you like. So the main hero is a man called Desh. And so we meet Desh in a previous book, and we know that his father is quite powerful in kind of like a government setting in this world, and he doesn't agree with some of his father's ideas. He tries to challenge his father, and as a result he kind of gets tossed onto this sort of planet and forgotten about, basically. But he gets, we find him in book 2, and he gets rescued, and then he devotes the rest of his life trying to get back at his father and get revenge from his father. And Desh turns up on this pleasure planet. It's a station, actually. I keep saying pleasure planet, but it's a station in space. And he meets Talia, and they have a relationship together, but he constantly tries to push her away because he knows that there's a high probability that he'll end up being killed for going up against his father, and he doesn't want her to be dragged into any of that. So I absolutely love this one. I really like Claire Kent. I gave this one 4 stars as well, so a really strong start to the year. All books so far having received 4 stars from me, and it was a great ending to the 4-part series for the whole series. So sticking with Claire Kent, I then moved on to read book 4 in the Kindled series, and this one was Hero. So this series is all set around, again, a dystopian world. There was an asteroid that hit the planet about 5 years prior, and it was large enough that many humans died, and the earth was pretty devastated afterwards. There's lots of ash in the air, and lots of people who did survive the original impact later went on to die of lung disease. So the series today has been all around people, you know, they're very much survival romances, people coming together, needing to be together to do things to survive, and we start to see communities kind of like come together and grow out of the rubble that's been left behind. So in Hero we're following Zed and Esther. Now Esther was in college when the asteroid hit, and after that she followed her mother and stepfather to a cabin which she shared with some grandparents, her stepfather's brother and his daughter and girlfriend. Now during the course of the 5 years following the asteroid hitting, everybody in the cabin dies apart from Zed, the daughter, and Esther, and they've kind of working together to you know, look after Esther and look after the daughter, and Esther very much becomes her, you know, her surrogate mother. And they're doing quite well in this cabin. They're able to be quite self-sufficient, but it's coming to the point where they are running out of food. It's the winter, animals becoming more scarce, and they know that it's almost time to move on. And one day when she's foraging in the local town, she bumps into some characters that we've met in previous books, and they decide to make the journey then to one of the communities, and it's quite a treacherous journey that they have to go on. So this is a romance that is set around, also not only are they, like, you know, living together in very close proximity, but also relying on each other to survive, but then they kind of go on a bit of a road trip as well. So what I like about Claire Kent's books, usually the hero and heroine, they come together, they have an attraction, want to be together, but either one or both of them kind of fight it. And what I liked about this one though was that there was less angst than in previous books. The hero didn't spend too much time challenging or thinking about whether he wanted to be with her. There was just a little bit of miscommunication in terms of how each other felt, and when they finally arrive in the new community, there's a chance to meet new people, and maybe they don't want to be together anymore, and maybe it's not what's best for them, but eventually, of course, it's a romance, so there is a happy ever after at the end. And again, absolutely love this one. Love Claire Kent, 4-star read. I would highly recommend. So next up, I read Broken by the Horde King by Zoey Draven, and this is book 4 in her Horde Kings of Dakar series. So in this series, there's an override, so each book obviously has a happily ever after, it focuses on a different Horde King, but there's an overarching sort of storyline throughout the series. We're building up basically to the King of Kings, who sits in the city of Dothikar, and his kind of like the kings of the hordes, or the warlords. They answer to him, but it's not right. Basically, he is a very corrupt king, and things aren't quite right on the planet. And there's also other species that occupy the same planet. So the Dakari are kind of natives to the planet, but there's also other kind of like other creatures, like other races that are on the planet. Now they have a kind of strict rule around, you know, no hunting, no setting fire to the earth and things like that. And the humans are kind of refugees on this planet, and they're not doing so well. So each of the book is kind of a little bit about that, how they starting to see the humans differently. But also there's kind of like this red mist coming across the planet, which is changing the way the planet operates, changing the beasts on the planet, and things are getting very unstable. So as we go through the story in each of the books, different things start to happen as some of the characters become quite important in the plot. So I just kind of wanted to mention that, because I have actually read the last 3 books in this series in the month of January, so it just kind of makes it easier when I'm explaining what they're all about. But this particular book, so this one was book 4, Broken by the Horde King. I absolutely love this one. It was my first 5-star read of the year. So this is about a human girl who is found in the forest by this Dakari family and taken to one of the Dakari kind of like communities, and she's kind of brought up as if she is a Dakari, but she is actually human. Now she trains as a healer, so all she's ever wanted to do is help people, so she's been training as a healer. But because she's human, she's not the same as everybody else, and she's kind of like bullied a little bit as she's growing up by the other Dakari, and she befriends one of the Dakari boys, who's actually kind of the prince of this community, and he is destined to become one of the Horde Kings in the future. But they are very, very close, almost best friends, spend all their time together, but they are attracted to each other, and she very much wants to be with him and kind of offers herself to him as his wife. But he very publicly kind of dismisses her and embarrasses her and turns her away. And then he goes off to become a Horde King, and they don't see each other for 9 years. And she's absolutely distraught by this, the fact that he's embarrassed her, because she was absolutely certain that he would pick her to be his wife. And the most reasons why he turned her away But 9 years later, he comes back to the community and he needs a healer for his horde, and he asks her to go with him, and she does, and she said she'll do that for the season. And of course, he realizes his mistake, does a lot of groveling to win her back, and ultimately, you know, it's a story about them. The reason I love this so much was because you could absolutely, like, the angst between them and the pining between them was absolutely palpable. From the moment I started to read it, I was totally sucked in, totally believed their love story, and really wanted them to get together and have their HEA at the end. And so this was everything that I wanted. It was full of action and chemistry and pining and love between these two characters, and so I absolutely loved it. Definitely my favourite of the whole series. But straight after that, I then went on to read Taken by the Horde King, which is book 5 in the series. And this one sees us where the Horde Kings are now taking a more active interest in this red mist that's coming over the planet, and one of the Horde Kings is basically camping out to make sure that the mist doesn't spread any further. Behind the mist, kind of in these mountains, there's a human and a group of humans. Now this human girl, she has a bit of a stutter, so again, people in her community think she's stupid and mistreat her, but she has a special power because she's one of the very few people that can go into this red mist and seemingly control it. When she goes in, she's not affected by it. Other people that go into the mist are very much affected by the mist. They either completely collapse, or their energy is sucked from them, or they, you know, they go a bit crazy. So she can go into the mist and seemingly be able to control it. So what they do is they convince her to go through the mist and take this Horde King. There's a bit of a prophecy and some witches who believe that if they have the heart of a Horde King, they can get rid of this mist. And so she's the one that's basically asked to go in there and get this Horde King. Now she does, and she kind of like lures him into the mist and lures him into captivity, and he is not happy about it, let's say that, and he does everything he can then to escape, and he vows that he's going to take her with him when he goes, and he's basically going to do to her what she did to him. So it's very, very, it was great fun. Again, the two had great chemistry. He's kind of really angry and she's a bit scared of him, but equally, you know, he's her captive. So it's quite interesting from that perspective. And of course, so again, a great read, really enjoyed it. Gave this one 4 stars. Wasn't as good as book 4 in the series, but still definitely a good one to read. So after that, I didn't dive straight into book 6. I had a little bit of a break. Now, at the same time, I had the opportunity to join an ARC team for a relatively new author called Deysi O'Donnell, and she's written some alien abduction romances. The ARC that was coming up and that was going to be available was a book coming out on the 3rd of February, but it was actually the 4th book in the series that she was writing, that she'd already written. So in order to prepare myself for the ARC, I decided I was going to go back and read the first 3 books. Now fortunately, they're all pretty short, they're all around the 200-page mark, so it didn't take me too long to get through them. So the next book I read, and which is the first in this series, was called Anna's Bounty by Deysi O'Donnell, and that's Earth's Bounty book 1. So the general premise of this series is that human women have been abducted from Earth, and they're going to be basically alien trafficked. I want to say human trafficked, but these traffickers have gone to several other planets and taken people from other planets as well, and they're put into cages on this ship, and they're going to be very much taken to auction to be sold to pleasure houses around you know, the universe. The thing is, the aliens don't know what they've taken because humans are thought to be extinct and no one knows where Earth is, and they've kind of accidentally stumbled across this planet, and when they realise that they're actually got humans, and at first they steal several human women, they know that they're on to a pretty lucrative game, because people will pay a lot of money in order to basically see and have and own a human being. So at this point then we meet the hero of the story, and there's a group of people who are bounty hunters, and their job is to stop this trafficking that's going on. And so these bounty hunters intercept this ship with these captives on board, and in doing so they kind of rescue the human women. So the hero in the story, he's sort of an alien. He's very cat-like, so he's described as very cat-like. He's got cat markings, sort of more cat eyes and a tail, but he's also very humanoid in nature. But instantly he has an attraction to Anna, who's our first human, and in kind of rescuing her, because they don't know where Earth is or where she's come from, and they can't get her out of the aliens that have kind of kidnapped them, he's not able to return her. But they know of a planet where there are refugees, and they've heard whispers of other humans, and so they kind of go there to kind of like return her. But ultimately on the journey, you know, they have a relationship, fall in love, and that kind of really sets up the rest of the series. So like I say, it's a very quick, short read. It's action-packed, lots of fun, lots of good spice, and ultimately with a happy ever after at the end. So I rated this one 4 stars, and I would recommend it if you like an alien abduction romance. So straight from there, I went on to the second book in the series, and this is Bella's Bounty. And this one follows the human Bella, and she's already at a pleasure house. So Tretto is the hero in this one, and he's more lizard-like, so he's definitely got more lizard features, still humanoid, but you know, like a forked tongue and partial scales on his body, and he basically has to help her escape. So he goes in to rescue her from the station, and he does. So there's not much more to say other than that. Again, it's a relatively short book. It's about 200 pages. It's very fast paced, lots of action, lots of phaser fire, you know, escaping in spaceships and all of that good stuff. And eventually Bella also finds her way to this refugee planet where these humans are, and they've definitely started to build a community where they are very much focused on protecting the humans in the galaxy, and trying to protect the whereabouts of Earth, and also locating the other humans that have been taken and where they might be in different parts, because they've all kind of been auctioned off and they're kind of been sold to different places. So definitely carrying on the theme, and again, rated this one 4 stars and would recommend if you like an alien abduction romance. So then I'll move very swiftly on then to the third book in the series, which is IGID'S Bounty. And IGID herself is not human, she is actually one of the bounty hunters, and now she's getting her own story. The hero in this one is always he's been brought up in the human sort of colony. His daddy is not human though, so he's kind of like part human, part alien, and he has always he's always dreamed of being a pilot and going into the stars. Now, unfortunately, in book 2, one of the bounty hunters ends up dying, and therefore the hero in the third book, he kind of takes the place as sort of the pilot in the bounty hunter crew, and he and IGID have to go off again to save some people, and so they're very much in close proximity with each other. But IGID species go into kind of like these heats, these mating heats, and so while they're traveling, she goes into a heat, and the hero in the story obviously has to help her out in that regard, and then the story kind of goes from there. Again, this is a really short book, quick and easy read, thoroughly enjoyable. It was fast paced, again, lots of action, lots of spice. But I have to say, I only rated this one 3 stars, which still isn't a bad rating from me. It still meant I absolutely that I liked it, but it wasn't my favourite of the series. It was probably the weakest one so far. So after IGID'S Bounty, I then finished up an audiobook that I'd been reading called Corrupt, which is the first book in the Civil Corruption series by Jessica Prince. So Jessica Prince does some absolutely fantastic contemporary romances and also small town romances, and she tried her hand at a pop star romance, or a rock star romance should I say, and I absolutely loved them. So there's 4 books in the series, they're all absolutely fantastic. I've read them all in physical copy, and I decided to go back and listen to them as audiobooks. So in this one we have the main character, he's Garrett, he's the drummer in the band, and we have Gwen. Now Gwen is a a young girl. She's recently lost both her parents, and she has moved to be with her friend in Seattle, and her friend manages to get a invite to a party at civil corruption at one of the band members' houses, basically. So it's Garrett's house that they're going to. They don't know that at the time, but she manages to sneak a ticket to this party. And it's not really Gwen's scene, but her friend convinces her to go along because, you know, she's in a bit of a slump because she's lost her parents and she's moved and she's struggling to find a job and everything. So she says, come along, it'll be great. Anyway, during the party, it all gets a bit too much for her, and so she kind of like sneaks upstairs, down a hallway and into a bedroom. Now this bedroom has a bit of a terrace, there's some open doors, and she goes out onto a balcony and she just takes a few moments to herself to breathe. And unbeknownst to her, Garrett is sitting in a chair on the balcony. It's actually his bedroom that she's in, and he's now sitting on a chair on the balcony. And when she realises someone's there, she is a bit shocked at first, but he says, sit down, have a drink, let's talk. And they spend an amazing night together, just talking and drinking and eventually having sex. And she thinks it's the most wonderful night of her life. She doesn't actually know he's a band member yet though, she just thinks he's another person at the party. And when she wakes up in the morning in his bed and the bed is empty, she is horrified when his personal assistant, Kimber, comes into the room, pretty much hustles her out of the house, says she's basically just a groupie, and kicks her out of the house, and then she kind of goes home. Obviously she's horrified by this whole experience. She didn't realise he was a band member. She's mortified that she's been kicked out of the house, but she basically puts it behind her. Except a couple of months later she realises she's pregnant, and her best friend convinces her to try and get news to Garrett that he's going to be a father. Of course she can't get hold of Garrett directly because he's so famous, but she manages to get hold of him through the PA, through the manager, and eventually has to speak to his legal team. And he insists on getting, you know, pretty much he's a complete and utter arsehole about the whole situation. He insists that she gets a paternity test, thinks she's trying to trap him, but she says, I don't want any money from you, I just wanted to do the right thing by telling you that you were going to be a father, but I don't want a penny from you, and if you are adamant you're going to give me some money, I want you to put it into a bank account that's specifically for the child, that I'm not going to touch, and it's just purely for the baby. Anyway, wind on several years where they've had a very difficult kind of relationship. So she very much lives in a sort of 2-bedroom apartment. It's not in the best part of town. She's trying to make ends meet. She is a manager in this coffee shop, and she doesn't have a great relationship with Garrett. She only ever speaks to him if when she needs to talk to him about his daughter, because it turns out the baby is a girl, so basically about Liddy. But of course he's always off touring, always doing the pop star thing, and so Liddy thinks her dad is absolutely amazing, the best thing since sliced bread, but he's absolutely, you know, just a complete arsehole basically to Gwen, and she's pretty much had enough of him. But she's a great mum and she never badmouths him at all. Now this all comes to a bit of a head about when Liddy's about 3 years old, because Garrett wants to know why she's not been cashing his checks, and she said, I've told you a million times I don't want your money, I just basically want you to take care of Liddy. And he sort of says, well, he didn't, you were happy to cash a check last year, so you know, I'm sure you enjoyed that money. And she said, and she then reveals actually the money that she'd asked for was to pay for medical expenses for her daughter, because her daughter had some hearing problems and she had to have an operation on her ear. And he's horrified because he didn't know. And this is when we start to realise that maybe the personal assistant that he's got in Kimber, and also the manager that they've got, Chris, are not on the up and up. They have been sort of meddling in personal affairs, trying to manipulate the band, and he realises that he's not been a great father, that she's actually not a money-grabbing groupie, and starts to see her really in a new light. And he suggests that he's going to take some time out from making albums and from touring, and he's going to spend more time with Gwen and their daughter Liddy. And so he invites them to move into the house with him, which she does, and kind of their relationship grows from there. Now, at the end of this book, they there's a confrontation with Kimber, the PA, and also the manager, and they basically get fired from their jobs, and then loads of stuff is leaked to the press, and loads of stuff happens where Gwen is really shed in a really bad light, and you know, Garrett thinks he might lose her. But also what we discover is a bit more about how the band started, how they grew up, and one of the initial band members was a man called Will, who's kind of their best friend, and he kind of didn't ever join them properly in the band, but they've always kept in touch with him. And at the end of this book, Will unfortunately dies, and they have to go to a funeral, and this is kind of where he gets back together with Gwen, because there's a bit of a third act breakup, gets back together with Gwen, but also we finally meet Will's family, his sister, and also Tatum, who is also significant to the band. And that's where the first book ends. And then I moved on to Throne of the Horde King, finally, which was book 6 in Zoey Draven's Horde Kings of Dakar series. I rated this one 5 stars. It's the longest one of the series as well. It's well over 400 pages, nearly 500 pages. And so it did take me a couple of nights to get through this one. And the first half of the book I did find seemed to be slow. I was thinking I'm never going to get through this book. It seems to be really, really long, and I you know, every time I kind of like looked at the percentage on my Kindle, didn't really feel I was making much progress, even though I felt like I'd been reading for a long time. But once I hit the 50% mark on this one, the story just kind of like, you know, went so much faster after that. And as I got nearer the end, I just felt myself wishing it was even longer, because I just didn't want to leave this world. But it's a great end to the whole series. All of the storylines that came together get completely wrapped up at the end. We find out what's been going on with the Red Mist. We find out what's been going on in the main city of Dothikar, and you know, the kind of like the evil king, if you like, he very much gets his comeuppance, which is great. Like I said, I did rate this one 5 stars, mainly because it was kind of such a great end to quite what felt like quite an epic series, that I couldn't not give it 5 stars. I still didn't enjoy it as much as book 4. That is definitely still my favourite in the series as a whole. And if I was going to be critical of this book, I would have liked to have seen more of the Horde Kings from the previous books, because it did felt very much like it wrapped the whole story up. But I would have liked to, because we've been on such an adventure with them all, I would have liked to have seen more of them, a little bit more of them. Although Zoey Draven did very much keep it to the hero and heroine of this story, and them being the focus, which is right because it is a romance story. But like I say, if I was going to be critical at all, that would be what my kind of one comment about it. But again, 5 stars, absolutely love the whole series, love Zoey Draven, and looking forward to reading more of the books that she brings out in the future. Again, keeping to the theme of trying to finish up some series that I'd started, I turned to Bound by Temptation, which is book 4 in the Born in Blood Mafia Chronicles by Cora Riley. So I rated this one 4 stars, really enjoyed it. And this one follows Liliana, Scudero and Romero. So again, this is kind of like following a mafia family. It follows a Chicago Italian mafia family and a New York Italian mafia family. In the very first book, basically, Luca marries Aria, and it's an arranged marriage, and she goes from Chicago to New York. And kind of the rest of the books really revolve around her other siblings. So she's got 2 sisters and a brother. So this 4th book in the series is about Liliana. She is the youngest sister, and she's had a crush on Romero for a very long time. Now Romero is kind of a soldier in the New York Mafia, and she is a Italian Mafia princess in Chicago. So it's a bit of a taboo, it's a bit of a no-no, because one, he's not senior enough to marry someone like her. There's a bit of an age gap going on, and also there's been quite a bit of tension between the New York and Chicago Mafia outlets, and Liliana is going to be married off to someone else. But she manages to convince her father to let her go and stay with their sisters in New York, and while she's there she starts a secret affair with Romero, and once people find out, it's not pretty, but she fights tooth and nail in order to get what she wants and to be with Romero. Okay, so then the next book I read was Bound by Vengeance, which is book 5 in the Born in Blood Chronicles by Cora Riley. I also rated this one 4 stars. Now this was slightly different, it went slightly off piece, it wasn't as focused on the same families as it was before. In fact, it seems to switch over to what I guess will ultimately become the second series that she's got, which follows the Camorra crime family kind of in Las Vegas. So in this one we have, the hero is a man called Grau. He's kind of the enforcer, the executioner if you like, in the Camorra family, and everyone is scared of him. He's a scarred hero, he looks extremely intimidating, and he's done some terrible things, so he's known for not at all being kind, and he's pretty much the leader of the family's you know, attack dog, essentially is what he is. So everyone's really scared of him. Meanwhile, we have Cara, who is a Mafia princess, and her dad is pretty senior in the Mafia, but he's been stealing money from the Mafia, which is clearly a massive no-no. When the head dude finds out, he's not happy, and he sets Growl onto the dad. So they storm into the house, they attack the whole family, they torture and kill the father, and as a reward, Growl gets his pick of the daughters, and he picks Cara, and he takes Cara home with him. So she becomes almost, again, it's a bit of a captive, but she's given to him as a prize. So he's not exactly kidnapped her, but she doesn't really have a choice to live with him. And at first she's really scared because everyone's scared of Growl, but actually he treats her as well as can be expected for someone like him, but he actually thinks she is extremely precious to him. He's never had anything so perfect or so beautiful that belongs to him, and he you know, wants nothing more than for her to truly want to be with him and for them to be together. So this is a great example really of this really sort of like frightening, gruff, scarred, terrifying hero who has a heart of gold inside, and absolutely treats this girl as if she's a very precious thing. Now, when I first started reading it, I was a bit confused because I was thinking, how does this link to the rest of the story? How is this linked? But what you actually find out is that Cara's mother is actually the auntie of the head of the Mafia in New York. So at the end of the book, they kind of like go back to the New York Mafia in order to like have protection from the Las Vegas Mafia, and I think this is how the two kind of series will sort of connect together. But I really like this one, gave it 4 stars. Okay, so then the next book after that, we actually then go back to one of Deysi O'Donnell's books, SHAE'S Bounty, which was Earth's Bounty book number 4, and this is the one they actually got the arc for. So I was very fortunate enough to get the arc in advance of this, the release date, but that it's now out. It came out on the 3rd of February. So in this one, we follow SHAE, and this is actually the villain's story. So in books 1, 2 and 3, we've kind of been following this villain, and he's called BELA'S, and he's basically been one of the key players in actually kidnapping these women and selling them to the pleasure houses. So he is pretty big villain. In one of the books, in the very first book, when we meet him, He's described very much as he's quite ugly, he's scarred, he's got bits missing from his ear, he's got part of his tail missing, and he's quite kind of like smelly, and he's let himself go, and his fur's all matted, because he's also one of those cat people. So like the hero from the first book, he's kind of like one of the sort of like more cat-like aliens. But he's not described in a very nice way, and he's also very unpleasant. And in book 2 we see him attack some women in the pleasure houses, and they kind of have to, you know, break that up. And there's also, you know, lots of fighting gone on, and actually in book 3 he's almost like left for dead, and we think that he might be dead, but he's not. And he is rescued in book 3 by one of the heroes, and he decides that he's going to try and redeem himself. So this is very much a villain that we've come to hate, and when we go into this book we're not really sure how he's going to redeem himself, or even how someone can love him. But he takes an instant shine to SHAE. He's desperate to be with her. He thinks that she's his mate, and so he does in fact help and rescue her. In the rescue though, there's an opportunity to actually, so although he's one of the villains, he isn't the main villain. So the main villain is now someone who owns one of the pleasure houses, but it's a particularly horrible one, where they don't look after the workers very well at all. I'll say workers, but you know, they're captives really, forced into this, but he's not a very nice one at all. And so they decide that they need to take him down, take him out. And so BELA'S and SHAE kind of go undercover into like one of his private sort of hotel places, which is pretty much, it's kind of a space equivalent of a sex club, I guess. So loads of people get invited to go there, and they, you know, they can do anything they want sexually, and there's sort of playrooms, and you can have orgies and stuff like that. Anyway, they have to then go undercover into this place in order to bring this guy down. So it's a great redemption arc for BELA'S. He does get his fated mate in SHAE, and it was definitely my favourite book of the series so far. I absolutely love a villain turned goodie, so a baddie turned goodie. I absolutely love. I always root for the baddies, and while he definitely redeemed himself in my eyes, he's still got an edge of darkness about him. So and I absolutely love that. So again, Deysi O'Donnell's quite a new author. Definitely think you should check her out. All of her books are pretty short, around the 200-page mark. They're high, you know, they're high energy, fast paced, and if you love an alien abduction romance, I definitely recommend. So then after that I read Ravaged Innocence by Misha Stone, and this is book 3 in the Innocent Bride series. So Misha Stone is an author I discovered a couple of years ago. I don't really hear many people talking about her or her books. She definitely writes a lot of possessive alpha heroes. The books themselves, while most of them have good plots, they're bordering on almost like erotic romance. You definitely need to read the trigger warnings if you're going to read something by Misha Stone, because it does involve sort of like, you know, non-consensual scenes. And so we could say this is sort of loosely a mafia romance. In this one we have Luka Romanoff, who is a member of a mafia family, and the heroine works in a bar. Luka comes into this bar in order to kind of track somebody down, and who's kind of betrayed the family, and as he's roughing this other man over, he sees her in the bar and tells her to go and hide in the stockroom, and when she kind of sort of disobeys him, he decides that he's going to punish her and for disobeying him. But she manages to escape and run away, and she thinks that's the end of it. But of course he doesn't let her get away with that. He chases after her, he tracks her down, and he pretty much forces himself upon her and decides that they're just going to be together. So these are the types of males that Misha Stone writes. You know, he sees a girl, he sets his eyes on her, and he's going to be totally single-minded and go after her until he gets what he wants. While I normally love Misha Stone, I actually rated this one 3 stars, so I still did like it, but I didn't absolutely love it. So then after that I decided I needed something a bit different, something a bit lighter, so I went for a contemporary sports romance, and this one is Forbidden by Carlisle Sorensen, and this is book number 4 in the Ward Sisters series. So this one I rated 4 stars. I did really like it, and it follows the second oldest Ward sister, Isabel. If you've read any of the others in the series, you'll know that Isabel is sort of like the most closed off. She's definitely got a wall up around her emotions and her heart, and she passionately loves her family and will do anything to protect them, but she's a bit standoffish and cold to kind of strangers and outsiders. Now, she had a bit of a problem controlling her emotions and her anger when she was a teenager, and when Paige came into her life, who became kind of her mother figure, she took her to the gym, and so since then Isabella has found an outlet in working out and gym and kind of boxing and fighting, and since then she's kind of worked, when she was a teenager she worked out in the gym, but now she is actually the manager of the gym, and that is her whole world. So outside of her family, the gym is her whole world. Now, the lady that owns the gym wants to sell the gym off so she can go on travels and retire, and she ends up selling it to a man called Aidan Hennessy, and Aidan used to be a professional cage fighter, MMA fighter, and he's now taken over the gym. Now, Isabella used to have a crush on him when she was younger. She's watched all his fights, she had his poster on the wall, and so when he comes into the gym and he's the new owner, she's very tongue-tied, and you know, she trips over and things like that, and she becomes like somebody that she has never been before, because she's never she's had a bit of a reputation to be very cutting and cold towards men, but they've instantly got kind of a chemistry. But Aidan's got a bit of a backstory himself, because he was married, he was passionately in love with his wife, and they've got a daughter, but unfortunately his wife died of cancer, leaving him as a single dad. So he comes into this as a single dad with a lot of grief still over the death of his wife, and when he takes an instant like to Isabella, he kind of fights this attraction and feels like maybe he's letting his wife down because of the way he's feeling, and also his attraction and love that grows for Isabella is very different from the one that he had with his wife, so he sort of starts to question if he's doing the right thing, if it's the right thing, and how he feels. Because Isabella is quite closed off as well, it takes a long time for them to sort of like come together, so it's quite a slow burning romance in some ways. There's a lot of sexual tension between them, a couple of moments where they almost get together but don't quite get together, but I think overall the story was done really, really well, and it had a really good ending to the story. Like I said, rated this one 4 stars and would highly recommend. Okay, so next up we have Toxic by Maggie Cole. So I rated this one 4 stars. I really liked it. It was nice to sort of be back in this world, and we see some characters from the original Mafia War series as well. So this one follows Bridget, who is the heroine, and we know quite a lot about Bridget already because she was the wife of Sean, who's one of the brothers and cousins of the Irish Mafia from the original Mafia Wars. And she went, after Sean died, she kind of fled to New York, and she's been living with her father in New York, so she's basically Irish Mafia but in New York. And before she met Sean, and as a teenager, she had a friendship, I'll say friendship, with Dante Marino. Now, he was part of the Italian Mafia. At school, him and his brother, they were twins, and him and his brother were kind of like, you know, man whores essentially. They were they had everyone every girl in the school, and Bridget really liked him, but Dante very much gave her the runaround, and he promised that they would be together several times and then kind of let her down and didn't turn up for dates or whatever. And in the end, she called it quits and said, "You're not going to mess me around anymore. Clearly you're just a man whore, you're just going to go off with these other girls." And she ends up going to Chicago for school and meeting Sean, falling in love, having kids, etc. And now she's back in New York. So this very much tells the story of when she arrives back in New York. Through the sort of the end of Mafia Wars, we see kind of what's going on from her perspective, and Dante has always regretted his missed opportunity from when they were teenagers. He regrets very much what he did, and the fact that he sort of gave her the runaround and didn't pursue the relationship, and she's been the one for him. And although he's had many relationships since then, he's never settled down, never got married, because no one would ever kind of live up to Bridget in his mind. So I really like this book because it's very much about, like I say, it's continuing the story from the Mafia Wars series. We get to see things from Bridget's perspective, and we get to see Dante kind of like grovel and try to win her back, and you know how Bridget struggles really to get over her grief about the loss of Sean, and to trust that Dante is genuine this time and that he's not going to mess her around and that he genuinely cares for her. So I really enjoyed that, and of course it sets up the rest of the series as well, and the next book in the series is about his twin brother. So I've not read that yet, but it's definitely on my TBR and I will read it soon. So just a few more to go now. So the next one I read, and it was Omega's Choosing by Evie Burks. I've never read anything from Evie Burks before, but again I kind of liked her kind of Omegaverse world. In this one there's more alphas than there are Omegas, so basically each Omega has to choose 2 alphas to be her mates, and in order to do that, when she presents, as in when she comes of age and she turns into an Omega, normally at the age of 18, but she's sort of late, she's sort of in her early 20s when she turns, she gets taken to like an island where these alphas live in this compound, and then she gets the opportunity to see some of the alphas and pick the mates that she wants. So then basically she picks 2 mates, and they have to live together for a couple of weeks, try each other out, see if they like each other, and if they want to be together, then they then kind of like claim each other with the mating bite and everything, and then they can go back to the main city to settle down and carry on with the rest of their lives. So then the last book that I finished in January was Defile, which is book 2 in the Civil Corruption series, and by Jessica Prince, and this is also something that I reread as an audiobook. I gave this one 4 stars as well. So Defile, it sort of follows the first book, and this is focused on the lead singer Declan, and his the heroine is a lady called Tatum. So this is basically a second chance romance. It's a rockstar romance, but it's also a second chance romance. Declan and Tatum were best friends since the age of 7, and so this book starts when they're 7 years old, and it takes us through them as teens, and we find out much more about the band. So basically Declan had always had a dream of becoming a pop star, and he eventually meets some other boys at school. So he meets Garrett and Mace and Killian, and they form this band Civil Corruption. Now they're kind of, at first they're just jamming and doing covers and stuff in their garage, but as they get older they decide they're going to attempt to make it big, start writing some of their own songs. And Tatum very much helps them through this journey. So she is the one that kind of like helps them with their lyrics. She comes up with the name of the band, and when they first start out, she's the one that's booking all of their dates in pubs and clubs and things, and getting them gigs. And when they turn 18 and they finish school, they kind of go on a bit of a road trip, which Tatum is completely organised, and they kind of go off on this road trip. Now by this point in time, Declan and Tatum are very much an item. They're completely in love. It's like they're, you know, soulmates, and they promise that they're always going to be together and never going to leave each other. But as the band starts to get more popular, they get themselves a manager, and they get Chris as their manager, who we met in book 1, and we realise he's not on the up and up. Tatum gets a really bad feeling from Chris. She really doesn't like him, but she doesn't want to tell the lads because she wants them to do well, and it's their dream to be in this band, and so very much she supports them. But Declan kind of starts to go off the rails. He's never really there. They're always touring and gigging and out and in interviews, and also they start to drink quite heavily and do drugs and stuff, and things start to go on the decline with him and Tatum, to the point where she refuses to go on one of their tours with them and says, no, I need a break and I need to go home, and he's really upset about it. And about a week into this sort of breakup, like this kind of like separation, she realises she doesn't want to be without him, so she flies all the way to Australia to surprise him, and she walks in on him completely high as a kite and in bed with 2 other women, and so this completely breaks her, and she leaves him, and he tries to get her back, but she's having none of it, and 10 years pass where they haven't seen each other, but he's still very, very bitter. You know, he very much believes that she promised never to leave him, and he's really bitter about this whole situation. And most of the songs that he's written since then have been about her and how evil she is and how she broke his heart. And we skip to 10 years later when, like I said, at the end of the first book, if you remember earlier, I said at the end of the first book, their friend Will dies, and they all come back for the funeral, and that's when they see Tatum. And they've recently sacked Chris as their manager, and so when Tatum comes back, they kind of say to her, why don't you become our manager? And at first she says no, because she doesn't think that she can work with Declan, but he convinces her that it's going to be okay, and so she basically becomes the manager of the band, and that's what happens from there. So there you have it. They're all the books I read in January. I was pretty pleased with my reading progress for the month, and also the quality of the books that I read, and I'm really looking forward to February. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll have to worry about that in the editing process, won't we? Because I really like the Vancouver walls. It's not Vancouver walls, is it? It's not even the Vancouver walls, Helen. The Washington walls. It's the Washington walls. This is why it's easier to do it weekly, right? Because I can't bloody remember what I've been reading. For the year of 2023, I've got a reading goal of 150 books.